Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. First of all, happy National Postdoc Appreciation Week. We appreciate everything you guys do here at Proteintech. So I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Afrida Rahman-Enyart, and I am a scientific liaison and product manager at Proteintech. And I'm really excited to be here along with my colleagues to talk about transitioning from academia to industry. So I just first wanted to share this company slide so that you know who we are as Proteintech. So Proteintech is a leading manufacturer of antibodies and immunoassays. We have antibodies against over 13,000 targets, and we also sell ELISA kits, IHC kits, and cell separation kits. Within our Proteintech brand, we also have our Humankind line, and Humankind manufactures cytokines and growth factors. And all our cytokines and growth factors are expressed in human HEC293 cells, meaning that they have native folding, post-translational modifications, and glycosylation. We also offer both RUO and GMP grade products. The third line that we have is our Chromotech line, and Chromotech manufactures nanobody-based reagents that are ideal for immunoprecipitation, immunofluorescence, and protein purification. So with that, I want to kind of begin the workshop. I just want to give you guys a little bit of background about who I am. And how I kind of got here to Proteintech. So as I mentioned, my name is Afrida Rahman-Enyart. I got a BS in psychology and I did a minor in biology from Purdue University. And at Purdue, I was in the research focus program. So pretty early on, I knew I really liked research. Then in 2012, I went to Indiana University where I did dual PhDs in neuroscience and psychology. And my thesis work there was in developmental neurobiology, and specifically, I was studying the neuregulin ERB signaling pathway and neuronal differentiation. I graduated in 2019, and then I went on to do a postdoc in urology at Northwestern University. And there, my research focus was on gut dysbiosis and microglial activation in pelvic pain. And then March of this year, I actually joined the Proteintech family, and I joined as a scientific liaison and product manager. So just a little bit of information about what a scientific liaison and a product manager does. So as a scientific liaison, my main role is to educate and help scientists by running technical webinars and career workshops, very similar to this one right here. I also do a lot of content writing, so blogs, email content, and product focuses. So if you go to, a conference and you pick up a flyer, a lot of the times, that's a scientific liaison or product manager role as well. I also stay up to date with science and in contact with scientists, so making connections and forming collaborations is a really important part of my job. I attend conferences. I also run ECR events, which stands for Early Career Researcher. So it's a way that Proteintech provides a platform for young scientists to share their research. And then kind of on the product manager side, I work with R&D to help launch new products, kind of figure out, how things might sell better. I also analyze product performance by running analytics and then take action accordingly. So if a product is doing well, maybe we want to push it a little bit more and make some social media posts and things like that. So this is kind of the agenda for today. So I thought it'd be nice to kind of give you guys in part one, preparing for transitioning to industry. So proactive actions that you can take, and then also tips for resume writing. For the second part, I will be joined by three of my colleagues, Dr. Tara Little, Dr. Jacob Culver, and Dr. Laura Brown. And they will provide the introductions to, their background and kind of what they do at Proteintech. And then we'll kind of open it up for you guys to put anything in the comment section or in the Q&A box and ask us any questions that you might have about this transition. So I want to start by talking about, my decision to leave academia. It wasn't because I didn't necessarily love academia. I actually really loved my postdoc, and I really loved my lab and the research questions that I had. But there was something about it where my heart wasn't quite in it. And the reason for me personally was because I thought academia was really tough. It's often unsupported. So I felt like, I'm just kind of writing grant after grant, and I'm not being paid what I thought I should be worth because I did all this education, and it just felt like I wasn't making as much as I wanted to be. But there's also this kind of stigma about leaving academia. And I really felt that the only skills that I had were in an academic setting because I spent, the past 10 years almost being in an academic lab and teaching and doing these things. So it was kind of scary for me to think of leaving academia and kind of transitioning into industry. But one of my friends actually recommended that I start following Isaiah Henkel on Cheeky Scientist. And that was such a good recommendation. So if you guys don't do that, I highly recommend you start following him. Um, he posts a lot of inspirational quotes, like things that you kind of take for granted as a PhD that you don't realize that you have these skills. So, for example, the one in the yellow box is a good one where he wrote, as a PhD, you probably have a stronger work ethic than most job candidates, but you probably have never thought about adding that to your resume. Yet this is a great self-oriented skill. So it's true, there's these transferable skills that we learn from our PhD that we often forget that are actually really valued in industry. So he does a lot of posts like this and also kind of posts that show you that your PhD is really valuable and you should get paid for it essentially. He also recently wrote this book, The Power of a PhD. I haven't read it yet because it literally just came out, but it's essentially about how valuable PhDs are to industry and kind of how to transition into industry. So I want to begin with some advice on where you can start if you're interested in looking into industry jobs. And the number one place is honestly LinkedIn. So LinkedIn allows you to kind of browse through different jobs that are available. So you want to make sure that you first research and understand the job that you are looking at before you're writing your resume. So each job will have a job description and kind of expectations of what they're looking for a candidate. And what you want to do is you want to definitely review these and highlight and underline key job specifications. And the reason for that is because then when you go on to writing your resume, you can make sure that those are kind of on the forefront and that those are highlighted in your resume as well. If there's a specific job that you kind of already know that you want, then you can network with people who already have that job. So most often people are willing to help you out. So if there's a type of job, if you want to be a lab scientist, you can go on LinkedIn and try to see who is a scientist in industry and kind of reach out to them and kind of pick their brain a little bit. Also, make sure that you apply for a job even if you don't meet 100% of the criteria. It's very seldom that every candidate meets 100% of the criteria. And there might be some things like, for example, if they say, oh, we want 2 years of industry experience, but you give, this really great resume that has all these skills that they're looking for, then they might overlook some of these other things. And a really top tip is to use LinkedIn to find people in that industry or company. So if you apply for a job, start trying to network with people in that company, and you can even ask for an informal interview. So then I want to move on to kind of resume tips. So there are some key parts to a resume that are usually all the same within a resume, but might kind of move around based on what type of job you're applying for. So you always want to make sure you have your name and your contact details. You want a personal statement, so essentially just a summary of who you are as a scientist and kind of what strong skills you would bring to the position. You also want to list your work experience, your awards and achievements. So this is where you would kind of put your publications and things like that. You want to talk about your education and your skills. So these would be like your technical skills from the lab. So some industry resume do's. Um, I'll talk a little bit more about this on the next slide, but you definitely want to lead with a short profile at the top because that's the first thing that people will read when they look at your resume. So you want it to be something that's catchy and something that really highlights your main skills that you're trying to communicate about when you're applying for this job. You also want to list your experience in order of relevance to your role. And remember that your master's and your PhD work is work experience. So don't just put this under education. Make sure that you talk about, your research experience and what you did in lab in your work experience as well. Also, you want to use clear bullet points. So don't try to kind of list everything out and use big paragraphs or anything like that. Try to keep things short and concise. You also want to write in the STAR format. So the STAR format is something that's really popular when you're interviewing. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, results. But you can actually use the STAR format for talking about your work experience as well. So for example, your situation and task would be your job role and then kind of what was expected of you. And then your action would be, something that you did that was kind of great in that role. So for example, if you identified a new gene mutation and it's this new susceptibility gene for schizophrenia, you can say that, you spearheaded this project. And then the results. So what came of it? Did you, receive a lot of grants? People were really interested. You had media attention or something like that. So that's really recommended when doing an industry resume. You also want to highlight key points that are relevant to each job. So again, this is where you're reading your job description and you see that they're looking for these certain types of skills. You want to make sure that you have those kind of at the forefront of your resume. And you want to emphasize employee traits that are listed in the job description. So for example, if they say, we want someone who knows how to collaborate or is a go-getter, you want to make sure that you also emphasize this stuff in your resume as well. So this is just an example of a short professional summary. And this is actually my professional summary that I used when I applied here at Proteintech. So I start by saying, I'm a dynamic and versatile scientist, with a broad range of technical skills, but that's not really the main point of this professional summary. I also include things like I have the ability to work independently or as part of the team. I also have strong communication skills, history of collaboration, leadership skills. So these are all things you learn during your PhD, but you might not necessarily think are things that you would put in a resume. But these are things and these are qualities that are very important in industry. Another recommendation that I have is making sure that you use action verbs. So IU School of Public Health actually offers a list of action verbs that are ideal for your resume. So I can share these slides with you guys so that you have access to this link. This is just a small snippet of what they include. But for example, if you want to say that you were a research machine, you can say analyzed, assessed, clarified. You have all these different types of action verbs. And the main reason for that is because you want your resume to be interesting. Resumes are inherently kind of boring because they're just a list of things that we've done. So to make it kind of more engaging, you want to make sure that you have these types of action verbs so that people can see that, oh, actually this is very interesting. It's not just they don't like overlook it. So I also want to include some industry resume don'ts. So one of the biggest recommendations is don't write a resume that's over 2 pages. Oftentimes people are reading hundreds of resumes, and so they kind of do a quick glance. So if they see that there's one that's really long, they might not look at it. So you want something that's really like punchy. So don't go over 2 pages. You also shouldn't list all your technical lab skills in detail. So you can have a list of your lab skills, but don't necessarily go into too much detail about what these skills are. Don't write in long paragraphs. So as I mentioned, bullet points are really going to be your friend when writing a resume. Don't list all your publications in detail. So I'll show you an example of how to kind of work around this. Don't list your references. So in a CV, it's pretty common to list your references. Don't do that on a resume because your resume is kind of it's valuable space. So you don't want to use it up by listing your references. Everyone knows that you have references. So if they see your resume and they like it, they might reach out to you and be like, hey, can we get your references now? And also don't submit the same resume for every application. It's pretty easy to tell if there's a resume that people are just sending to every job because it's not going to highlight the specific things that the person who's hiring was looking for. So in the job description. So here's some tips on how to keep your resume under 2 pages. So the first thing is don't try to include everything. So as I mentioned, don't list out all your publications. So for example, here in my resume, I've selected 3 of my favorite publications. But I know you want credit for all the publications you've done because you worked really hard. So you can just write something like out of how many ever publications. Same thing with poster presentations and professional talks. You know, you definitely want to get credit for all the hard work you put in, but you can just list a number of posters and talks that you have done. And then you can say something like, you know, a list can be provided upon request if you want to. The other thing is that lists will really save you. So you want to mention your technical skills, especially, you know, if you're looking for a lab type job in industry, but it can get overwhelming for someone to kind of parse out and figure out what kind of techniques you know. So it's really nice to have bolded subsections of just like general things. So like molecular biology, and then kind of all the skills that fall under that category. And that makes it a lot easier for someone to be like, oh, okay, I want to make sure that I know someone who has experience with husbandry, and they can kind of look and be like, oh, okay, here. So that would be 2 of my main recommendations on how you can really cut down on your resume length. And then for this kind of last section, I just want to talk about, you know, to include your transferable skills from your PhD in not only your resume, but to kind of know the value of your PhD. It's not all about just you're a good scientist. You're also good at time management, for example, right? So you're probably running multiple experiments at once. You probably have an experiment going right now while you're watching this webinar. And you're also juggling the demands of different supervisors. So whether it's your PI or, you know, it was your committee, you know how to kind of manage your time and kind of address all these questions that people have. You're also good at project management, right? So you design experiments, you have to stick to timelines, and then you're also very flexible because you had to work around COVID shutdowns with limited lab space. You do grant writing. So these all fall under project management. Team working is a big one. So I know that during my PhD, I did a lot of collaborations, and not only with just the members of your lab, but you might do external collaborations and a lot of cross-site working. As a PhD, you're also very resourceful, you have tenacity, and you've dealt with a lot of hardship, right? So how often have you had to troubleshoot your experiments, and you might even go months without data? Not only that, but you're constantly working on a budget, you're applying to grants from many sources. So you kind of understand that, you know, you have to work hard in order to do all these experiments that might not always work out in your favor. So those are really important skills as well. Communication in my opinion, is probably the biggest one. It's really important to know how to communicate. And as a PhD, you are constantly communicating your research. You're doing your thesis writing, you've done paper writing, blog writing, grant writing, poster presentations, lab presentations, conferences, and you might even do some public outreach as well. And then, of course, leadership. So you might be mentoring undergraduates or graduate students. You've probably taught either labs or a class, and you're leading your own research project. So all these experiences make you a good leader and have taught you leadership skills. So just remember that, these are also skills that you can put on your resume and you can talk about during your interview as well. So where do you start? So if you are interested in looking for a job in industry, you can attend careers events. So a lot of universities have careers events that they offer where there will be a lot of people from, biotech, or other industry companies that will come, and they'll set up booths and they'll talk to you about different careers available. Also, create a good LinkedIn profile. So there are a lot of tips online on how you can do this. And you can start adding relevant connections if you know kind of what type of job you want in industry, and you can start following companies that you're interested in. It's also important that you write you have a resume prepared. And the way that you can do this is you can write your CV. So just write everything that you want and then rewrite it and try to cut the number of words in half until you have only 2 pages. And if you are finding it really difficult to write your resume, you can seek help from people in the field. So there's people that you can reach out to on LinkedIn, and then you can also look through you can look through LinkedIn and find people who already have the job that you're interested in and see if they would just, maybe look at your resume. And then just remember that you're worth it as a PhD. So getting a PhD is very difficult and you've done it. So it's your time that you spent getting your PhD is worth being paid for, and you do have a lot of skills. So just make sure you have that kind of confidence going into it, and that will really help you a lot when you're trying to apply for a job in industry. So with that, I want to start the second portion, which is the panel discussion. So for the panel discussion, I'll be joined by 3 of my colleagues, Dr. Tara Little, Dr. Jacob Culver, and Dr. Laura Brown. They'll begin by introducing themselves, and then if you guys want to input your questions in either the chat box or the Q&A box, then we can go ahead and start addressing those. So with that, Tara, if you want to join in and introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. So, hi, everybody. I'm Tara. So, I am the Mid-Atlantic account manager for Proteintech. So, that's basically a fancy way of saying I'm the sales rep for the Mid-Atlantic. I cover all the accounts in Delaware, Pennsylvania, Maryland, DC, Virginia, and North Carolina. And my job consists of just selling the entire portfolio of products to all of our different accounts. So, I work with academic labs, industrial, and some government labs. I wanted to give you an idea of sort of what the day-to-day looks like for me. So I attend conferences, I do vendor shows and other events throughout the region. I work really closely with the rest of the sales team, with our marketing team and product management to find new customers and help out our current ones. I'm in charge of sort of managing the quarterly revenue budget for our territory. So that's like your main job as a sales rep, is to make the company money. And like I said, the primary focus of my job and the real highlight is to develop customer relationships. That I think is something we really value here at Proteintech. And I just wanted to give you guys a really quick overview of my background. So I got a bachelor's in biochemistry in 2015. I hopped around there doing all kinds of different internships. So I have a paper in quantum mechanics that I do not understand at all at this point. But I did that. I did some virology work, did some sequencing, that kind of thing, and ended up going straight from my bachelor's right into grad school. So I went to Hopkins and got my PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology. And while I was there, my thesis work focused on reproductive biology. I wrapped up my PhD program right at sort of peak COVID in spring 2020. So I ended up getting a job with QIAGEN that I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. They sell like DNA and RNA kits as a sales rep covering the NIH. I was there for about a year in an entry-level position until I upgraded to this position at Proteintech, which I've been in since 2021. So I've been here for about a year at this point.
Cool. Thank you so much, Tara. So then, Culver, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
There we go. Hello, my name is Culver. I am a senior scientist in R&D, and I guess if you're looking for different perspectives, my perspective will be coming from someone who did not do a postdoc, but then stayed in lab science and went straight into lab science and industry. So I'm doing pretty similar work to what I did during my PhD, where I'm still working in labs, still doing cell culture, but now instead of trying to publish papers, I'm making marketing data. So like microscope images to put on a website and doing research and development and trying to make new products to bring to market. Did undergrad at Ball State in Indiana. I took a one-year internship at Eli Lilly, and that's when I realized that I wanted to get out of academia and into industry work. And then I finished my PhD at Yale University, and I'm only about a year out from the PhD because I jumped directly into industry work here at Proteintech, doing research and development.
Great. Thank you so much, Culver. And then lastly, Laura.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura. I am the technical account manager, excuse me, for Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. I have a role that is very similar to Tara Little's, wherein we work very closely with the product management and the business development teams, as well as our collaborating with our sales team to identify new opportunities, new key opinion leaders. Where I differ a little bit is that I try to lean more towards the technical side of things in providing a first shot sort of triage of any questions that our customers within the academic, industrial, and government labs within my territory may have on our product portfolio. Obviously, we have a fantastic customer support and technical support group. And if it's anything that I can't answer immediately, I forward directly to them. So similar to Tara as well. So I attend conferences, vendor shows, local meetings and events, that sort of thing, and manage the quarterly budget, of course, because sales roles generate money. So I also have a fairly extensive background similar to the other PhDs here on our panel. I did my bachelor's at Carnegie Mellon in chemistry. I went from there after a brief stint in industry doing, lab research assistant type jobs. I got my master's at George Washington University, where I did my thesis research in Children's National Medical Center in an asthma and CF lab. I jumped from there into a PhD at Brandeis in Waltham. And I got that in molecular and cell biology. And I was studying DNA damage, repair, and oncogenic response. So from Brandeis, I jumped into a postdoc in biomedical engineering at Tufts. And after a year, I got burnt out quickly and decided that academia really wasn't for me anymore. So I started looking into alternative careers within, what you could do with a PhD. So the first jump from there was to be the territory manager for New England for Mockery Noggle, which is similar to QIAGEN, where we sold DNA, RNA, and protein purification kits. From there, I spent 3 years at Millipore-Sigma doing a research technology specialist role for academic, government, and hospital accounts in New England. And then this year, I joined Proteintech, and I love it here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So let me go ahead and stop sharing, and then we can begin the Q&A session. So it seems like we have a few questions. Yes, the slides and the recording will be shared. to Amita. Okay, so we have a question from an anonymous attendee who's saying, what is about stability in industry jobs? So are you asking about the stability of industry jobs? That's kind of my take on it. Do any of you guys want to begin? Or I can answer it too. No? I mean, I've only been here for a little bit, so to me, it's like, yeah, it's really stable. So I don't know if I'm like the best. Me and Culver are probably not the best ones to answer this question because we haven't been here for very long. So Laura, maybe this is a good question for you.
Yeah, I've been in industry quite a bit now, I guess, but not at Proteintech the whole time. So I guess the longest stint was at Millipore Sigma for 3 years. Generally, I would say that industry jobs are slightly more stable than academic jobs because you're not fighting the constant grant writing race and the fact that funding is not always an easy thing to obtain. So yeah, I would think industry is slightly more stable. And once you're in industry, you have opportunities to jump into other roles and, you know, further career development as well. So you can use your position as a platform for the next step.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And yeah, that's a good point because in industry, it's like you get a job in something, like you have a certain title, but your title is constantly changing. Whereas in academia, it's definitely not like that. Okay, so someone asks, can we use a senior scientist or staff scientist as a reference instead of a PI if the PI is not very supportive about switching to industry? How much contact is usually acceptable to be added as a reference? This is a really good question. You guys can jump in whenever, but I say yes. You can use whoever you want as a reference as long as they kind of know you in a professional setting. So yeah, if you don't want to use your PI as a reference, I don't even think that looks weird to people who are hiring in industry because that's so common, I feel. So yeah, definitely use whoever you think would kind of sell you the best. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, as somebody that's like currently hiring for sales positions, I would say definitely, as long as it's somebody you work close with, or you worked closely with, then absolutely use them. And even to the point, you know, I've had people apply for jobs and they let us know right off the bat, like during the interview process, that, hey, my PI is like very old school, not supportive of industry. And if we know that, then we can kind of avoid talking to them during the interview process. And maybe, you know, if you decide to take that job and leave lab or something, we can potentially help with that too. So I just say, yeah, be upfront about the situation. If you're not going to have the PI as a reference, just maybe mention it. But yeah, as Afrida said, that's a super common attitude coming out of academia. So that's not going to throw any of us for a loop.
Yeah. I do want to mention that we have so many questions. We're probably not going to get to all of them today, but I will make a list of them. And if the panel is okay with it, I'll send it to you guys. And then if you guys want to like put any input, we can like individually email people as well, because there's some really good questions, but there's no way. There's like 40 questions. Okay, so this one's a good one too. So this person earned their PhD outside of the US. So it's a bit difficult to find a position in the US since they don't have connections yet. So do you guys have any suggestions? I kind of think LinkedIn would be your best bet. I would research some US-based companies that you are interested in, and then kind of go from there and just kind of search the company online and see who all works there, and then try to form connections, especially if you know what you want to do. So if you want to get into the lab, you know, try to connect with some of the lab scientists. But
Mhm.
yeah, that's difficult.
Yeah, I would say to look and see. I don't know if the person that asked this is based in the US already or not, but if you are, look and see if the area you live in has networking programs. Because there are a bunch of really good networking groups that are, they don't have to be related to your job or anything. You can just show up, grab a beer with some other scientists in the area, that kind of thing. And that's a really good way to make connections.
Mhm.
The two international strategies I've seen, doesn't apply to me personally, but one is I've seen people do multiple postdocs as they try and get a green card or citizenship, which is rough and you don't get paid much. And the other thing that I've seen is people find international companies and then use their international connections as a way in. Because if you have, like, Proteintech also has offices in other countries, and if you can get in there, then you can easily bounce between the different sites.
That's a really good
tough.
point. Yeah.
Mhm.
Do you guys think there's a good time to transition to industry? Meaning right after a PhD, after your first postdoc, senior postdoc? I don't know. I mean, I think it's dependent on your timeline and your trajectory. For me, it was really nice to do a postdoc. There were certain things that I still wanted to learn about, and so I found a lab that was doing this type of research, and then I kind of went into industry. But I don't think it's necessary to do a postdoc. I mean, Culver, you seem to like Proteintech, and you didn't do a postdoc, and Tara, you also didn't do a postdoc, right? So you guys came
Yeah.
straight from PhD.
Mhm. Yeah, so obviously I'm biased because I didn't do a postdoc. But the advice that I've always heard is that if you've made the decision at the point of the end of your PhD that you definitely want to do industry, then don't feel like you have to do a postdoc. You can get that same experience finding an actual position in industry, making twice as much, if not more money than if you did a postdoc. If you're not sure though, and you might want to stay in academia, you're still kind of deciding, do the postdoc because it's a lot easier to transition from a postdoc to academia than go to industry and transition back out.
Yeah, and I would say like within industry, it's you're either a PhD or you're not. So if they're looking for a PhD, they don't necessarily care whether how many if you did a postdoc or not, if as long as you bring in the skills that they are wanting. So yeah, that's really good advice, Tara. It's like if you know that you want to be in industry, then there's no reason. Is there anything you miss about academia?
Ooh.
This is a good one. We can all answer this one.
I mean, I'll take that one. So yes and no. I loved the parts of academia where you actually had hands-on experience at the bench and you're actually doing the experiments and you're actually pushing science forward. But the thing that I found since transitioning away from academia that actually helps with that is that you can be involved in a sales role or an adjacent role and help push science forward and help advance knowledge without necessarily doing the experiments yourself. You can help in a consultative manner in this regard, and that actually is great because then it's almost like you get to sort of live vicariously through them when your contacts have great success, and then the inevitable downsides of research wherein you go several months without things working don't hurt quite as bad because it's not your experiments, even though you do care because you care about people, but it's a little bit easier to temper the swings, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what I miss is kind of the autonomy of my time, because the current role that I'm in right now is it's a very like 9 to 5 type of role. And so, before it was like if during my postdoc or when I was in grad school, I could be like, oh, there's a break in my experiment. I can just like go run to Target and do my errands right now. There's not really that kind of flexibility as much because you're kind of you're on the clock essentially. So that would probably be the main thing that I miss.
I'll be honest, I don't miss anything about academia. I love the job I have. It's way more flexible. I'm not getting up at 2 a.m. to do mouth injections. Love it. No regrets.
I was gonna say overall, yeah, industry has been much better than academia. Okay, so how did you decide that the role, what role was for you? I'm having trouble deciding with a path.
I can actually take that. So you don't necessarily need to jump into a role thinking, oh, this is my final landing spot. That's rarely the case anyway. Most people will jump into industry in, an entry-level position or something that they know they're going to be in for a couple of years and use the career development at your hands, at your fingertips, and actually network with everyone you can at the company and at fellow companies. Really help yourself move along, and then look around while you're in that company, look around at all the other positions that other people have, see what they do, see what those positions entail, and see if, where you are is where you want to be for a while, or, oh, hey, do I want to jump into this kind of role later, maybe if a year or two down the road. So then you can start tailoring your personal development towards jumping into that next role and making that next step. And generally, if you find the right company that actually has an awesome culture, like a corporate culture like we do at Proteintech, they're going to be 100% supportive of your efforts at career development and finding where your next step is going to be and when that's going to be, what the timeline would look like, what sort of things you would need to study.
So for me, I actually didn't apply for the job that I have right now. I applied for a different job, and during my interview, they were like, "Oh, hey, we think that you would like this job better," and they were totally right. I mean, I absolutely love this job. I kept talking about how I like to present and talk, and so they were like, "We have this other position." So, a lot of the times you just kind of need to get your foot in and kind of just start talking to someone in that company, and they might even know about roles that you didn't even know existed in industry, or that they kind of have made that and they need somebody. So what about you, Culver? Did you know you wanted to be in the lab? Like, is that the only type of job you were applying for?
Yeah, I basically only looked for scientist positions because throughout my PhD, I love being in lab, but I kind of hated the structure of it. And I'd say like the grant writing and some of the current layout and pay. So I kind of knew straight ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a question to Culver. Do you miss the disease/medical relevance of your research?
Yes, I wanted to bring this one up because this was actually a question during my interviews that almost stumped me. I was asked why Proteintech and how do I feel about leaving academic research and working on just like antibodies, because it's a very big switch. And I don't miss it at all. And my response during the interview was that I'm not driven necessarily by like the disease or the biological pathway. I'm more driven by the questions that are left unanswered and trying to kind of like optimize and tinker here and there to get results to a goal or to a end. And whether that's a publication or bringing a product to market doesn't matter to me because I'm more interested in the questions. So for me, I don't miss it and I'm happy, but definitely something to think about before your interviews because I stumbled a lot.
Yeah, that's a good point. That I should have included that. They will, during your interview, ask you why you're switching. So make sure you know why. So what about master's students without any experience in the field? I would think that all the advice that we've provided would be pretty much the same. Being a master's student, you're still, you have a higher degree and you're still, worth getting, you still learn all those skills as well, I would say. So I would say the advice would be the same. I don't know if you guys have anything different to say about that.
We have quite a few master's students, master's degrees in, I'm on an automatic timer, in conjugation and flow cytometry. And my suggestion would be try and find a position that at least matches some of your skills. And then a lot of them will jump to different departments and get trained in other things later.
Yeah, I'd say it doesn't really matter what your title is or like what you have after your name. I'd just say as long as your skills match what's being looked for. Like you might have a master's degree and have more experience than somebody with a PhD for a certain job. It just kind of depends.
So this is a question for our sales group here. So thanks for the wonderful insights. My question is, how difficult is it to maintain a work-life balance in a sales/field roles in industry?
I would say it's actually not as difficult as being in a postdoc was. As long as you are able to interact with your customers, with the researchers within your region, as long as you have your meetings, as long as you make the time that you're supposed to make and do the tasks you're supposed to do, the timing is flexible, which is not that different from being in a PhD or in a postdoc, but it seemed to me, at least, postdoc life was much more draining and much more difficult to balance with home life. And that was part of the reason why I got burnt out, is because, I wasn't home much and I didn't see my son, and he was really young and cute and they're only little for so long. So yeah. It also totally depends on the culture, I would say, of the company. And this particular company understands that, we're people, we have lives. So as long as we do our job, they're not going to, yell at you for having to be, mom, or having to go, pick up your puppy at puppy play care or whatever.
Yeah, they are particularly good about it here. They make you take your PTO so that they're like, you need mental health days. So how necessary is postdoc experience when you're trying to find a non-research position, such as a medical liaison in the industry? So I guess that would be a question for me. I wouldn't say that it's really necessary at all. So in terms of a liaison position, the main thing that you should be able to do is to digest literature and understand research, which you learn in your PhD. So I don't think that you necessarily need a postdoc in order to be a liaison. For me, it was helpful because I switched labs. So I was more in a pain lab, and it was in urology as opposed to neuroscience, and it was like a developmental neuroscience lab. So for me, it helped because then I was able to kind of learn more, and that oh, everything's not about neuroscience, because I was in this really tiny niche where I thought everything's about neuroscience, and it's no, there's all this other stuff. So as a liaison, you have to be very willing to kind of learn everything. So, but like I said, you learn all that in your PhD. So, when should we ideally begin the job hunt when doing a postdoc?
I would say never too early to start.
Yeah, I would say I did it 3 months before I actually wanted to get the job. And that kind of worked out well for me. I don't know, how about you guys? When did you guys start applying? Do you guys remember? Or was it just a
Yeah, I would say about 3 to 6 month lead time. I mean, it was a little bit different for me back then because my jump from academia to industry was before COVID. So I would say it's probably about three months is accurate these days. Certainly start feelers and going to networking events early, and make sure your resume is on point ahead of time. And once you have those things lined up, then you can start chatting with people, just as we went, as Afrida mentioned earlier, making sure you chat with people who have the kind of role that you're interested in and start tailoring things, and then narrow down who you want to talk to, what kind of jobs you want to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say coming out of PhD, it was the same thing. I started applying about 3 months before I knew I was going to defend.
So this question is for Tara and Laura. So to those now dealing with budgets, did you find you needed extra education or training to deal with this sort of work? Was that provided by the company?
I wouldn't say I needed a ton of extra training. I did need, I don't know about Laura. I know I did need a lot of help with like Excel, doing pivot tables and stuff. I didn't know how to do that before I got into a job where I'm looking at like finances on Excel spreadsheets. But otherwise, no, it wasn't too much training. And for both of my experience, so at my previous role at QIAGEN and for Proteintech, I would say both companies were really good about getting me up to speed on those kinds of things as well.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. A lot of the companies that are interested specifically in hiring PhD scientists for sales roles know that you're not going to be coming into it with sales experience. They know you're not going to have budgetary experience necessarily, so they will actually set up these training courses for you. And so both of the companies, actually all three of the ones that I've worked at since my postdoc, have been like that. They've been great at making sure you're trained and ready to go.
Here's an interesting one too. Which part of your job in industry have you found the most rewarding compared to academia? I think we all are going to say the same thing.
I like the work-life balance personally. And I like being able to help other people move their experiments forward and reach their goals without necessarily having to suffer the heartbreak of things not working myself.
Yeah, I definitely
actually livable is nice.
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, I definitely agree with the work-life balance is so nice. The increase in pay is really nice. So those are definitely my two favorite things. Also, I have a job where I can talk a lot and I like to talk, so that works out really nice too.
Yeah, with my particular role, I get to travel a ton, which is fun. Like the work-life balance is still fantastic, but I also get to like see new places. Like I live in Maryland. I'm flying down to North Carolina next week. I got to go to New Orleans earlier this year. We go to conferences all the time, so that's a fun little perk that I know when I was in grad school, I might only get to go to like 1 or 2 conferences a year. So I get to see a lot more now.
Someone asked, is it normal to ask the potential employer not to contact my current or previous supervisors?
Yes, because a lot of people will understand that your PI is not necessarily supportive of you jumping out of academia. I think we touched on this earlier. I know Afrida, you talked about it earlier, especially where you find someone, and Tara too, where you find someone who you work directly with who can actually vouch for your skills and your specific experience points for interviewing. It doesn't have to be PI.
Yeah, I agree. So this person's asking, is there any flexibility in working hours as new parents? So yes, it depends on your company. So at Proteintech, yes, they're very nice about that. They're very flexible. So if you have a child in daycare and you need to leave at 3 to go pick up your child, that's totally acceptable. They're willing to kind of, work with you. It's been mentioned there's like great work-life balance here. But I would say that probably depends company to company.
Yeah, and I'm happy to say too, like I'm currently pregnant. I'm due to have a baby in November. So any of you that have been through that know that's like endless doctor's appointments for 9 months. And that's been super easy with this role. I work from home most of the time, so I can shoot over to a doctor's appointment real quick in the middle of the day. That kind of thing's been super easy. And I know some of the other people on the panel have kids, so I hope it's kind of flexible too. Once my kid's here, this will be my first, but it definitely depends on the company.
So there's a question for Culver. How is the R&D scientist work-life balance compared to academia?
Yeah, this also relates to the last question about flexibility, because For R&D, I don't always work a specific 9 to 5. I more shoot for over 40 hours a week, but it's still nowhere close to what I was putting in for the PhD, which is great. And I still come in on the weekends pretty often because I'm working with stem cells right now, so they need a lot more care. But then that means like yesterday I got to leave at like 3 p.m. because I kind of shift the hours around as needed. So I would definitely say a huge upgrade from the PhD, but still flexible based on because sometimes experiments just run long. So I'm here sometimes until 7 p.m., but then I'll balance it out on a different day.
This is a good question. How do you answer the recruiter question about your motivation to switch from academia to industry?
I think that depends on the recruiter, right? Some of them are, some of them are more brutally honest than others, and they are kind of looking to see if you'll say, oh, I want a bigger salary. But most of the time, it's probably a good idea to lead with, I need a change of pace. I want to be able to help other people. Academia is not the best fit,
Yeah,
that way.
I agree. You kind of want to be a little vague about it. But I mean, feel free to be at least be a little honest. You can say that the work environment in academia is just not for me, and most people will understand what that means.
My tip would be to answer with positivity. Instead of saying I want to leave industry, or instead of saying I want to leave academia, you're entering industry. Like I told them I learned what I wanted to from my PhD, and now I'm ready to apply those skills in industry. And kind of be saying the same thing, but on the positive side of it. It's like I'm excited to start working here, not that I'm excited to leave academia.
Yeah, that's good advice.
I know my line that I always use was like, and this is totally true, like don't make up something, be honest, but I would say like I liked working in the lab. I loved doing my PhD, but my favorite part of that PhD was traveling and talking to people. So I'm looking at roles that let me do that 100% of the time. So that way you can kind of put a positive spin on it and not just be like, well, being in academia is awful. So yeah.
So we have time for maybe a couple more questions. And then, as I mentioned, I'll go through all of these and make up a list, and we'll try to answer as many as possible and email you guys some responses. So this is a question: is an introvert personality a defect in industry?
No.
Not necessarily. No, I mean, it depends on your job. I mean, for me, Tara and Laura, maybe, I don't know.
I'll be straight up, I'm naturally an introvert. So I have figured out this very weird personality trait in that I'm an introvert in my personal life. And as soon as I go into sales mode, I'm an extrovert. So yeah.
Yep, I do the same thing. It's a helpful trick to be able to mask that way. The problem is if someone's naturally introverted, they have it's almost like they have a limited energy resource, a limited battery for that sort of social interaction. And so if you draw down too much on that, you'd be like, okay, the next day or so, I need to be at home and just sitting in front of the computer and not talking to people because I can't deal with talking to people. But it's not a hindrance to even highly interactive roles like sales. If you're an introvert, that's totally fine. Knowing your local area, knowing the types of people you're going to be interacting with is much more important. And you have to understand that a lot of the time in science, introversion is pretty common, I'd say. So being able to understand those sort of cues that people give you when you go to talk to them is also huge, because you can tell when they've had too much and you need to stop, you need to maybe cut the meeting short because it looks like they're getting antsy and need to continue on with their experiment, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So let's do one more question. How did you deal with the business aspect of your positions? Did you get on the job training for this? I did. I don't know if you guys got when we were doing they do like a week-long onboarding when you get a new job. And so part of that onboarding was, yes, talking about kind of the business side. So the way that Proteintech does it is they'll have you meet with people from different departments, especially the departments that you'll be working with. And so we got to talk to someone who's more on like the business side of things. And then we got to talk to some of our R&D scientists and things like that. Again, that's probably different from company to company, but at Proteintech, yeah, we did.
Mhm.
I don't know if that was your guys' experience as well.
Yep, definitely. And it was the same at both of the previous companies I worked at. There was an extensive onboarding period and extensive training on the job as well. And anytime you felt that you needed a boost on something, you can always reach out to your managers. That's actually huge. Make sure you reach out to your managers if you feel like you're overwhelmed, you don't understand something. It's okay to admit that you don't know something. You can say, hey, can I have a refresher on this, this, and this? And they'll say, great, yeah, I'd love to walk you through that.
Absolutely. In industry, it's like asking questions it's much easier. You don't always have to like pretend you know everything. People are much more willing to, yeah, retrain, or a lot of the times training is videotaped, so you can just go back and rewatch videos and things like that. Okay, so then I just want to share this slide and kind of end the session for today. So as an attendee for today's event, you guys are all eligible to receive a free sample of one of our Proteintech antibodies. And so you can just follow this link here. I will email this link to you guys so you don't have to worry about copying it down right now. And with that, I just kind of want to thank everyone for joining us today and for participating in this panel discussion. Thank you to Tara, Culver, and Laura for being here as well. You guys all had really great questions. We'll try to get to as many as we can by email. And then if you are interested in more of our webinars, please do follow us on our social media. We do post about them there. So with that, I just want to thank everyone again for coming, and I hope you guys have a great day.